had intended to start to use these Presanctified liturgies to introduce us to some of the words of the author of the Presanctified liturgy service, who was a Pope of Rome named Gregory Dialogos. But when I saw today that we were to be celebrating Patrick of Ireland, I thought perhaps that could wait till Friday. So I just want to say a couple of words about Patrick, and I'll read just a few paragraphs at the beginning of his one of his surviving works, which is called The Confession. St. Patrick was not Irish. I'm going to start with that. He was not Irish, not by blood, not by birth, and that's something I think a lot of people have wrong. He was a Briton. He was from the other island up there, and in fact, he was from a clergy family. He was the son of a deacon and the grandson of a priest. And St. Patrick grew up without knowing God. And that's an amazing thing to think about, to think that you can grow up in a very pious family and not know God yourself. But that's the truth of the matter. St. Patrick grew up not knowing God. And coming out of that formation, when he was at the age of 16, raiders from the country of Ireland, which was not, one like political country, but from the island anyway. Raiders from Ireland came and they sacked the area where he was from, and they took him captive and enslaved him in Ireland, and he became a shepherd there. And they forced him to tend the sheep. What you would think would have been the destruction of Patrick's life, like the worst thing that ever happened to him, actually became the best thing. And Patrick became a man of real prayer. The guarding of the sheep that he was enslaved to for years and years, he spent his time in prayer. I think he boasts somewhere here in the confession, maybe it's at the beginning, I can't remember. Maybe it's not boasting, but he just recounts, that he prayed 100 times a day. And this was, well, what else did he have to do? He was watching the sheep. But this calamity turned into great grace for him, and he became holy. And he returned, he escaped, he ended up at God's directive. God spoke to him and said, leave. And so he went to the coast, and there was a ship, and he ended up getting on the ship, and they took him over to Britain, and he made his way back to Britain. Anyway, the short of it is that Patrick, when he went to Britain and returned to his family, of course they were overjoyed, but he was a holy and repentant man at that point, and he ended up being ordained priest and then bishop. And from there, he ended up receiving a call from God to return to Ireland. He went back to the very people who enslaved him and preached Christ to them and converted thousands and thousands. And it's not really that great of an overstatement to say that Ireland became a Christian region because of the work of Patrick. So, I think just summing that up, sometimes the things that we think in life are the greatest curses that we bear, the things that have been like the worst thing that have ever happened to us, actually are God's grace for us. If Patrick is not kidnapped and enslaved and forced to work a terrible job out in all the elements, then he doesn't become the saint. His heart is not full of the joy of Christ, and he isn't this great preacher who inspires, whole nations of people to follow Christ. So that's that. I'll leave you though with the introductory words of his confession. I, Patrick, a sinner, a most simple countryman, the least of all the faithful, and most contemptible of many, had for father the deacon Calpurnius, son of the late Potitus, a priest, in the settlement of Benevin Tiberne. He had a small villa nearby where I was taken captive, I was at that time about 16 years of age. I did not indeed know the true God. And I was taken into captivity in Ireland with many thousands of people, according to our deserts, for quite drawn away from God, we did not keep his precepts, nor were we obedient to our priests, who used to remind us of our salvation. And God brought down on us the fury of his being and scattered us among many nations, even to the ends of the earth, where I, in my smallness, am now to be found among foreigners. And there the Lord opened my mind to an awareness of my unbelief, in order that even so late I might remember my transgressions and turn with all my heart to the Lord my God, who had regard for my insignificance and pitied my youth and ignorance. And he watched over me before I knew him, and before I learned sense or even distinguished between good and evil, he protected me and consoled me as a father would his son. Therefore, indeed, I cannot keep silent, nor would it be proper. So many favors and graces has the Lord deigned to bestow on me in the land of my captivity. For after chastisement from God and recognizing him, our way to repay him is to exalt him and to confess his wonders before every nation under heaven. For there is no other God, nor ever was before, nor shall be hereafter, but God the Father, unbegotten and without beginning, in whom all things began, whose are all things, as we have been taught, and his Son Jesus the Christ, who magnificently always existed with the Father before the beginning of time, in the Spirit with the Father, indescribably begotten before all things, and all things visible and invisible were made by him. He was made man, conquered death, and was received into heaven, to the Father who gave him all power over every name in heaven and on earth and in hell, so that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord and God, in whom we believe. And we look to his imminent coming again, the judge of the living and the dead, who will render to each according to his deeds. And he poured out his Holy Spirit upon us in abundance, the gift and pledge of immortality, which makes the believers and obedient into sons of God and co-heirs of Christ, who is revealed. And we worship God, one God, in the Trinity of holy names. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.